The phone pressed cold against my ear as my son's voice cut through me. "Mom, there's no room for you at the wedding." My world collapsed in an instant, grief turning to steel, love into fury. But what I did next silenced their laughter forever. But first, let's go back to the beginning. I was standing in my small kitchen, the late afternoon sun spilling through the curtains in a soft orange glow, folding laundry on the table. The rhythm of it was almost comforting. The smell of detergent clinging to the freshly washed cotton, the simple order of stacking shirts into neat piles. It was an ordinary chore, one I had done countless times over the years, but it gave me peace. In that moment, I felt quietly proud of myself. At 63, I still managed to keep things tidy, to keep moving, to fill the silence that had grown thicker since my husband passed years ago. The phone rang, cutting through the stillness. I wiped my hands on the towel, tucked into my waistband, and reached for it. The screen lit up. Logan, my son. Even after all these years, seeing his name always brought a tiny swell of warmth to my chest, as if just hearing his voice could erase the distance of the years gone by. But when I answered, the warmth I expected didn't come. Instead, his voice slid through the line, clipped and cold, like he had rehearsed the words before dialing. "Mom," he began, his tone stiff, "we don't have room for you at the wedding. Angela and I decided it's better this way." At first, I didn't even process the words. They hung in the air, sharp and foreign, like a language I couldn't quite understand. "No room for you at the wedding." I repeated the phrase in my head, trying to wrap my mind around it. But then the meaning settled, heavy and undeniable, and my stomach turned to stone. I felt my knees weaken. My hand, gripping the phone, trembled so violently that the fabric I had been folding slipped to the floor. I pressed the device harder against my ear, as if maybe I had misheard, as if maybe he would laugh and tell me it was some tasteless joke. But there was no laughter, only silence, followed by the shallow sound of his breathing. "No room for you." I had spent 63 years of my life building a home, pouring love into every corner of it, sacrificing without complaint so that my son could have the kind of life I never did. And now, when the most important day of his life was arriving, the day a mother dreams of seeing, he had not only left me out, but had the audacity to say it as if it were nothing more than a minor logistical detail. My throat tightened. "Logan," my voice cracked. "What do you mean, no room? I'm your mother. How could there not be room for me?" He sighed, long and impatient, the way a busy man does when a colleague asks a question he doesn't have time to answer. "Mom, don't make this harder than it is. The guest list is already full. Angela's parents are covering most of the costs, and they don't think it's a good idea for you to be there. They don't think it's a good idea for you to be there." The words scraped at me worse than the first blow. His voice wasn't just cold, it was detached, like I was an item being scratched off a list, not the woman who had carried him, nursed him, raised him when his father was gone. I had weathered storms for that boy. I had stood in kitchens like this one for decades, working late nights at the diner, my feet blistered, my hands raw, so he could have tuition, so he could walk across a stage in a cap and gown. And now he was telling me I wasn't welcome at the very moment those sacrifices had been leading toward. My body froze, but my mind raced. I thought of the countless times I had pictured this day. Logan standing at the altar, me in the front row, tears in my eyes, but joy filling my heart. I imagined leaning in close to whisper, "That's my boy," when the vows were said. I imagined Angela smiling politely, maybe awkwardly at first, but eventually warming to me. I had dared to believe I might become part of their world. But that vision shattered in an instant. Instead of flowers and music, All I could hear was the hollow sound of my son telling me I wasn't wanted. "Logan," I whispered, fighting to keep the desperation out of my voice. "I've waited for this day since the moment you were born. I never missed a school play, never missed a birthday. I don't care if I have to stand in the back of the church. Just let me be there." There was a pause, but it wasn't filled with reconsideration. It was filled with a kind of finality, as though he had already washed his hands of the matter long before he called. Then came his reply, steady and cold. "Mom, this is already decided. Please don't make it dramatic." Drama. That was what he called it. My tears, my pain, my very presence, dismissed as nothing more than drama. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it, my reflection in the dark screen a blur through my tears. My chest burned, my breath coming shallow and ragged. I wanted to scream, to ask him how he could forget everything I had given him, everything I had been. But I didn't. Instead, I ended the call before the scream could escape, before my heartbreak could be heard. The room was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of devastation, of betrayal, of a life's worth of love suddenly cast aside. I looked down at the shirt crumpled on the floor, the fabric twisted, as if it too had been abandoned. My hands shook as I picked it up, clutching it to my chest like a shield. And in that moment, standing in my kitchen with the weight of those words echoing in my ears, I felt something inside me crack, a fissure so deep that I knew things could never go back to what they were. As the silence of the empty kitchen pressed down on me, the words Logan had spoken, "No room for you at the wedding," echoed until they filled every corner of my mind. They repeated themselves like a cruel chorus, each time sharper, heavier, more poisonous. And as they sank into me, my heart began to dig backward into the past, unearthing memories I had long carried like badges of honor. Now they stung like open wounds. I was Martha, 63 years old, a widow, a woman who had built her life not for herself but for her son. When Logan's father, Richard, passed away, I was 38. He died suddenly, an unexpected heart attack that left me standing in a hospital corridor, staring at doctors who looked at me with pity in their eyes. I remember clutching Logan's hand. He was only 12, while he kept whispering, "Where's Dad?" He promised to be here for my baseball game. That was the moment I knew. It would be just the two of us from then on. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Grief became something I carried silently, like an extra weight on my back. I had a child to feed, a mortgage to pay, and a boy who still believed in birthday cakes and Christmas mornings. I picked up every extra shift I could at the diner. Some weeks I barely slept more than 3 or 4 hours a night. My body ached, my feet throbbed, and my fingers were blistered from scrubbing counters and carrying trays. But I smiled through it all, because when I came home and saw Logan's face light up as I placed food on the table, it reminded me why I kept going. There were times I skipped meals so he could have seconds. I remember the hollow ache in my stomach at night, telling myself I wasn't hungry, while I tucked him into bed and prayed he would never notice how thin I was getting. I told myself it didn't matter if I went without, as long as he had enough. He was growing after all. He had a future. My future had already been written. I was just surviving. But his could be anything. College was the hardest. Logan dreamed of becoming an architect. I knew he had the talent. Even as a boy, he would spend hours sketching houses and towers, his pencil moving furiously over paper, as if his imagination couldn't be contained. When the acceptance letter arrived from his dream school, he was ecstatic. But the tuition was more than I could fathom. I remember sitting at the kitchen table late into the night with stacks of bills spread before me, tears blurring the numbers I could barely add up. The cost seemed impossible. And yet, I found a way. I worked doubles, sometimes triples. I borrowed where I could, begged when I had to, and denied myself every comfort. My hair went gray earlier than it should have. My hands aged faster than my face. But when I watched him cross that graduation stage in his cap and gown, when I saw the diploma in his hands, I felt the weight lift, if only for a moment. It was worth it, I told myself. Every ache, every tear, every lonely night. It was all worth it because I had given him the chance to stand taller than me. But now in this moment, I wondered if it had all been invisible to him. Did he not remember the nights I waited up with soup when he was sick? Did he not recall the times I sewed patches onto his jeans because new ones were a luxury? Did he not see the lines etched into my face, carved there by the endless hours I spent on my feet, serving strangers so he could have shoes on his feet? And Angela, sweet-faced Angela, with her pearls and manicured hands. Her family with their manicured lawns, their cars that gleamed like mirrors, their voices dripping with the kind of politeness that hid disdain beneath it. To them I was not Martha the mother, Martha the widow, Martha the woman who had fought tooth and nail to give her son a life. No, to them I was simply Martha the waitress. Martha the woman with calloused hands and a modest home that smelled of detergent instead of perfume. I could see it clearly now. The whispers behind closed doors, the subtle suggestions, the comments Logan must have absorbed over dinners and planning sessions. Do we really need your mother there? What would she wear? How would it look? They didn't want me ruining their glittering tableau, their perfect photographs. To them, I was a blemish, an inconvenience, a shadow they would rather crop out. The thought twisted my stomach until it burned. I had endured so much for Logan, and yet, standing beside Angela's family, I was nothing but an embarrassment in his eyes. My shock hardened into something darker, a deep, searing hatred, not only for their arrogance, but for the way my son had let them rewrite the story of his life. Our life. He had chosen their approval over my love. I sank into the chair by the table, my body heavy with exhaustion, my mind thick with betrayal. The laundry lay forgotten, a half-folded shirt limp across the floor. And as I sat there, staring at the faded wallpaper, the truth pressed in on me like a vice. Everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, had been dismissed in a single phone call. The silence was unbearable, yet it told me more than words ever could. It told me that in Logan's new world, there truly was no room for me. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my breath shallow, my voice trembling but firm enough to carry my anguish. Logan, I'm your mother. How could you do this? For a moment, there was only the faint sound of static, the ghost of a pause that almost gave me hope. But then came the sigh, long, impatient, heavy with the weight of someone forced into a conversation they would rather avoid. It wasn't the sigh of a son speaking to his mother. It was the sigh of a man who had already decided her place. Mom, Angela's parents are paying for most of it. They don't want drama. I felt those words slap me harder than any hand could. Drama. That was what I had been reduced to. Not a mother. Not a woman who had blood, cried, and worked her body to the bone so he could have the life he now flaunted. No, I was drama. A problem to be managed. A stain to be hidden away. The breath caught in my throat, hot and ragged. My lips quivered as though I might plead, but I stopped myself. I would not beg, not when my dignity was already hanging by a thread. Yet my chest ached with the urge to make him remember, to force him to see me not as a spectacle to avoid, but as the woman who had built his foundation stone by stone. The silence between us stretched, cold and suffocating. I could hear his faint exhale, quick and shallow, as though he were anxious to end the call and move on with his life. My fingers dug into the phone, pressing so hard my knuckles turned white. Drama. The word clawed at my mind, bringing with it a rush of images I had buried deep. I thought of the mornings when Logan was a boy, his hair sticking up in every direction as I rushed to iron his school shirt before my shift. I remembered the nights he had fevers so high I pressed cool towels to his forehead while whispering prayers into the darkness, promising God that I would take every sickness, every pain, if only he would spare my son. Was that drama? I remembered the day his father's casket was lowered into the ground. Logan's small hand gripped mine so tightly I thought my bones might snap, his tearful eyes searching my face for strength. I swallowed my own sobs and held him, telling him that everything would be all right, even when I had no idea how we would survive. Was that drama? No, that was motherhood. That was love. But love, it seemed, had been rebranded by Angela's parents as drama. And Logan, my boy, my flesh and blood, had accepted their definition without hesitation. The phone felt heavier by the second, like it carried not just his voice, but the entire weight of his rejection. My body trembled, a shiver running through me, though the kitchen was warm. I wanted to scream, to demand he take back the words, to ask him how he could forget everything we had endured together. But I could hear it in his tone, the flat finality, the quiet determination. He wasn't going to change his mind. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood, but even that pain couldn't compare to the one ripping through my chest. My heart hammered, frantic and wounded, as if it were trying to escape the cage of my ribs. Tears welled, hot and blinding, threatening to spill and betray just how deeply his words had cut me. I managed to whisper, "I never thought you'd see me this way." But he didn't answer. Perhaps he didn't hear me. Perhaps he chose not to. I hung up before my tears turned into a scream. The sound of the disconnection rang in my ears, final and brutal, louder than any slammed door. My hand slipped to my side, still clutching the phone like a weapon that had just backfired, leaving me wounded by my own son. The room around me blurred through the tears. The laundry on the table seemed meaningless now, the shirts and folded towels mocking me with their order while my heart unraveled. The clock ticked above the stove, each second dragging on like a cruel reminder of how time had carried Logan further away from me, inch by inch, until he no longer saw me as mother, but as obstacle. I sank into a chair, my body folding under the weight of grief. The silence of the house pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. No laughter, no footsteps, no voice calling, "Mom, where's dinner?" Just me and the echo of his words. Drama. It lingered in the air, poisonous, reshaping everything I thought I knew about my place in his life. My sacrifices had not earned me honor or respect. They had earned me the label of nuisance, of embarrassment. All those nights alone, all those years of toil, every single moment I had chosen him over myself, it had led me here, to this. To being told I was not only unwanted, but unwelcome. The wound deepened with every breath I took, as if my body refused to let me forget. My heart throbbed like it was bleeding inside my chest, each pulse reminding me of how much I had given and how little it meant to him now. I sat there for what felt like hours, frozen, every memory I had of Logan flashing through my mind like a cruel slideshow. His first steps, his first day of school, his first heartbreak, the look on his face when he graduated. All those firsts, all those triumphs. And behind each of them me, always there. And now I was nothing but drama. The tears finally spilled, hot rivers carving paths down my cheeks. My hands covered my face as sobs broke free, raw and aching, filling the empty kitchen with the sound of a heart breaking. That night, I lay flat on my bed, my body rigid against the mattress, eyes fixed on the ceiling as though the blank white surface could offer answers. The house was silent, but it wasn't a gentle silence. It was the kind that pressed down on your chest, heavy and suffocating, forcing you to listen to the storm raging inside your own mind. Logan's words echoed again and again. They don't want drama. Every time I replayed them, the meaning shifted slightly, cutting me in new places. I was a burden. I was an embarrassment. I was a liability. The labels tangled together, and each one hollowed me out a little more. My son, the boy whose hand I once held through nightmares, had reduced me to nothing but a problem to be erased. At first, the pain was overwhelming, but pain has a way of transforming when it lingers too long. As the hours stretched, grief began to harden. My tears dried on my cheeks, leaving salty streaks that stung against my skin. What had started as heartbreak began to congeal into something sharper, darker, more alive than sorrow. Anger. It wasn't a wild anger that burned and vanished quickly, but a deep, rolling fire that spread quietly, devouring the fragile walls I had built to contain my heart. I felt it in my clenched jaw, in the way my hands gripped the blanket until my knuckles ached, in the restless pounding of my pulse. Anger, unlike pain, gave me energy, and with that energy came memory. That's when it surfaced, the detail so small I had nearly forgotten it, yet so significant it now gleamed like a weapon hidden in plain sight. The honeymoon. Months ago, before the invitations were even mailed, Logan had called me in one of his rare moments of warmth. I could still remember his voice that day, lighter, almost boyish, the way it used to be before Angela's family wrapped him in their silk-tied expectations. "Mom," he had said, "we're planning the honeymoon, but it's complicated with the bookings. You've always been good with details. Could you help?" I had been thrilled just to be included. I agreed without hesitation, my heart swelling with a kind of naive gratitude. The arrangements were lavish. Flights to Bora Bora in first class, a beachfront suite in a resort so extravagant it seemed plucked from the pages of a magazine, candlelit dinners on the sand, a private yacht tour beneath the stars. The total bill was staggering, $50,000. Logan had thanked me for taking care of it, but it was I who had paid the deposit, I who had placed every booking in my name. He said he would reimburse me once Angela's parents sorted the wedding finances, but he never followed up. They were too distracted with venues and florists, too consumed by the performance of creating the society wedding of the year. The honeymoon was filed away, completed, forgotten by everyone but me. And now, as I stared at the ceiling, that forgotten detail rose to the surface, gleaming with possibility. Every plane ticket, every reservation, every luxury moment that Angela's family likely boasted about to their friends, it was all tethered to me. The signatures, the confirmations, the legal ownership of the package, it was mine. The realization settled over me like a second skin, cooling the fire of my anger into something steadier. Power. It was a strange word for a mother to associate with her child, but that's what it was. I had been stripped of dignity, cast aside like an unwanted guest, but here was proof that I was not powerless. They had overlooked me, underestimated me, assumed I was too meek, too old, too irrelevant to matter. And in that arrogance, they had handed me a weapon without realizing it. I let the thought linger, turning it over in my mind, savoring its weight. For so long, I had been the one without choices. Life had pushed me into corners, widowhood, poverty, sacrifice. But this time, I wasn't cornered. This time, I held the key. The ceiling above me blurred as my focus shifted inward. My breathing slowed, steady now, no longer ragged with grief. The humiliation Logan had dealt me still stung, but it no longer left me paralyzed. Instead, it sharpened my vision. I could see everything with startling clarity. The laughter of Angela's family as they prepared for the grandest celebration of their lives, the way they probably spoke of me behind their manicured smiles, confident that I was out of the picture. They thought they had erased me, but they had left me in control of the one detail that could shatter their perfect tableau. I didn't smile, but the corners of my mouth tightened as though my body recognized the shift before my mind admitted it. This wasn't about pettiness. This was about justice. They had stripped me of my rightful place at the wedding, but they had unknowingly built their paradise on ground that belonged to me, and I alone had the power to make it vanish. I lay in the dark, the anger inside me no longer wild but channeled, disciplined. My heart no longer raced with despair, but beat with a steady rhythm, like a drum announcing a change. I was not drama. I was not irrelevant. I was Martha, 63 years old, worn by life, but not broken, dismissed but not powerless. And as the hours slipped into dawn, one truth crystallized so clearly it felt carved into stone. The power they thought they stole from me had been mine all along, quietly waiting. The day arrived, though I tried to pretend it was just another Saturday. But my body betrayed me. Every tick of the clock pulled me toward the truth. By noon, the house was too quiet, the silence crawling over me like ivy, suffocating and invasive. I should have been there, bustling nervously in the front row, smoothing down my dress, fighting tears as I watched my only son promise his life to another. Instead, I stood at my window, staring at the neighborhood street that had carried him away from me. The first photo arrived on my phone with a cheerful chime that cut through the air like a knife. I didn't want to look, but my hand moved on its own, opening the message before my mind could protest. And there he was, Logan, my son, my boy. Dressed in a tuxedo so sharp it seemed tailored not just to his body, but to the life Angela's family had carved for him. His smile was wide, white, flawless. Yet to me it looked brittle, like porcelain that might crack with the slightest pressure. A second photo followed. Angela in her gown. White silk, a train so long it flowed like a river behind her, her veil catching the light in a halo of perfection. She looked radiant, triumphant even, the kind of beauty money could buy and polish until it gleamed. Around her stood her parents, beaming like royalty greeting their subjects, their chests puffed with pride. They had won, and the camera immortalized their victory. The messages kept coming, neighbors and acquaintances sending glimpses of the ceremony, as though they were doing me a kindness, including me from afar. Each image was another twist of the knife. Logan at the altar, his eyes locked on Angela as though no one else existed. Angela's father walking her down the aisle, his hands steady, his posture declaring ownership and legacy. The families clapping, their smiles stretched so wide they looked rehearsed. Not one image contained me, not a chair reserved, not a mention of the woman who had raised the groom. They had curated a story where I did not exist, where Logan had been plucked whole and perfect from Angela's world, as if I had never touched him, never fed him, never loved him. I waited for the pain to crush me, for tears to blind me, for grief to wring me out like a rag. But instead, something inside me shifted. A hardness settled deep in my chest, cold and immovable. It wasn't sorrow anymore. It was steel. Steel doesn't bend to sentiment. It doesn't break from being excluded. It hardens under pressure. And that's what I felt in that moment. The calcification of my grief into something sharper, stronger. The photos no longer stung like wounds. They became evidence, proof of the arrogance with which I had been erased. Every picture told the same story. They didn't just leave me out. They deliberately sculpted a reality where I never mattered. Angela's family had wanted a flawless tableau, a portrait of wealth and refinement unmarred by the presence of a waitress mother in her sensible dress and weathered hands. Logan had allowed it, had played his part in the fiction, had smiled for the cameras that captured everything except the truth. But life, unlike photographs, cannot be airbrushed into perfection forever. Pictures fade, paper yellows, smiles blur with time. What remains, unerasable, are the choices behind them. And Logan's choice was clear. He had chosen them, their world, their approval. In doing so, he had discarded me. I studied the images again, not with the eyes of a grieving mother, but with the clarity of someone taking inventory. Every detail stood out, the flowers dripping in excess, the string quartet in the corner, the champagne flutes raised in synchronized toasts. The extravagance wasn't celebration. It was theater, and I had been cut from the cast. Fine. Let them enjoy their performance. Let them bask in their illusions of triumph. But I knew something they did not. I held a thread that ran straight through the heart of their perfect tapestry. One tug, and it could all unravel. The photos kept arriving well into the evening, but by then I no longer flinched when I opened them. Each one only deepened the steel inside me, sharpening the edge of my resolve. I was no longer the grieving woman shut out of her son's wedding. I was something else now, something stronger, something dangerous in my quietness. They believed they had erased me, that they had written me out of the story of Logan's life. But a story isn't complete until its ending. And I, Martha, still held the pen. So I set the phone down, the images still glowing on the screen, and sat back in the chair. My breathing was calm, steady. My heart no longer hammered in anguish. It pulsed with purpose. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't begging. They had written me out of their perfect story. Fine, but I would write the ending. The morning air was still, but inside me there was no trembling, no trace of the chaos that had devoured me in the days before. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in front of me, the number already dialed in my mind. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, only clarity, sharp and unyielding, like the blade of a knife freshly honed. The travel agency's line clicked, and a polite voice answered, cheerful and unsuspecting. I spoke with the kind of calm precision that comes only after suffering has burned itself into something harder than fire. Yes, I'd like to cancel my reservations. I gave the confirmation numbers, my voice steady, each syllable clean, almost detached. With every word I uttered, the empire they had built on arrogance and exclusion began to crumble. Flights? Erased. The agent confirmed it, typing briskly. First-class tickets? Gone in seconds, as if they had never existed. I imagined Logan and Angela clutching their glossy itineraries, their plans bound to paper that now meant nothing. Hotel suite, gone. The beachside palace, the room that was supposed to hold their whispered promises and champagne-soaked laughter, disappeared with the stroke of a key. I pictured the white sheets left unslept in, the balcony overlooking waves they would never see, the welcome basket of tropical fruit rotting, untouched. Private yacht tour, vanished. The fantasy of a star-strewn evening on the water, just the two of them, stolen by the same woman they had tried to erase. The agent's voice softened with confusion. Are you certain, ma'am? This is a very valuable package. I almost laughed. Valuable, yes, but its true value was no longer measured in dollars. Its worth lay in the justice it carried, the rebalancing of a scale that had been tilted too far against me. I didn't need her to understand. I only needed her to press the keys that shifted everything. Within minutes it was done. Refunds issued. The system reset. The agency thanked me for my business, their tone professional, unaware they had just helped a mother turn betrayal into retribution. I sat back in the chair, the phone warm in my palm, my breathing even, my pulse steady. There was no rush of adrenaline, no manic thrill. What I felt was deeper, heavier, quieter, satisfaction. The satisfaction of control reclaimed, of dignity restored not with pleas or tears, but with action. I thought of Logan then and Angela, their suitcases probably packed, their anticipation swelling with every passing hour. I imagined them rehearsing the pictures they would take, her silk dress flowing on a breezy pier, his arm around her waist as the sunset blazed behind them, their smiles rehearsed and practiced for the world. They believed paradise was waiting, guaranteed, unquestionable. But paradise was never theirs to claim. It had always been mine to grant or deny. I lifted the phone again and dialed his number. This time there was no fear of what he might say, no sting from the sound of his voice. Only certainty. The call rang once, twice, then shifted to voicemail. His recorded greeting, casual and detached, played through the line. When the tone sounded, I spoke. My voice was low, steady, almost gentle, but every word carried iron. No room for me at the wedding, then no room for you in paradise. I ended the call without waiting for anything more. The message hung in the air of my kitchen, invisible yet powerful, like smoke after fire. I placed the phone on the table, folded my hands, and sat in the stillness. There was no guilt, no regret, only balance. For years I had accepted the role of silent laborer, the one who sacrificed without recognition, who endured without applause. I had fed, clothed, and carried Logan until he was strong enough to step into a world that now denied me. And when he stripped me of my place, he believed I was powerless, irrelevant, incapable of altering the story. But he was wrong. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, precise and devastating, into a phone line. Sometimes it hides in the fine print of a contract, in the overlooked detail of a booking name, in the quiet determination of a mother who has nothing left to lose. As the clock ticked above me, I felt a new stillness settle in my bones, not the suffocating silence of grief, but the cool, expansive quiet that comes when justice has been served. I had not raised my voice, had not begged for inclusion, had not stormed their golden stage. Instead, I had dismantled it from the shadows, one careful keystroke at a time. The paradise they imagined was gone. The honeymoon they boasted about was nothing but cancelled codes in a travel agent's system. And Logan, my son, would hear my voice each time he tried to understand what happened, steady, unforgiving, reminding him that I was not so easily erased. I leaned back in my chair, the kitchen light casting long shadows across the room. For the first time in days, I felt calm, not the fragile calm of denial, but the grounded calm of someone who has acted, who has seized back the dignity stripped from her. And in that calm, a single truth resonated. They had underestimated me. They would never do it again. The first voicemail arrived less than an hour after I made the call. Logan's voice, strained, frantic, teetering on the edge of panic. "Mom, what did you do? The agency says everything's been canceled. Please, tell me this is some kind of mistake. Just call me back. We can fix this." I didn't move. The phone buzzed against the table, but I let it vibrate itself into silence. A minute later came another, his tone sharper now, laced with desperation. Then another. By the third, it wasn't Logan's voice I heard. It was Angela. High-pitched, furious, each word spat like venom. "How could you do this? Do you have any idea what you've done to us? You've ruined everything." Her shrillness cut through the speaker, filling the quiet house with the sound of her unraveling composure. The texts followed in waves, flashing across the screen in angry bursts. Mom, please answer. Why would you do this? Angela is furious. Call me back. Each one more frantic than the last, the digital equivalent of pounding fists on a locked door. I let them pile up, untouched, their urgency dissipating into the same silence they had once imposed on me. They had written me out of their story. Now I was the author of its footnote, and I had chosen silence as my punctuation. I moved to the window, my cup of tea warming my palms. Outside, the sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky in bands of crimson and gold. I watched as the light softened, shadows stretching long across the yard. It was beautiful in its simplicity, nothing like the extravagant spectacle of the wedding I had been barred from. And yet this moment belonged to me wholly and peacefully. As I sipped, I thought of the irony. For weeks, they had orchestrated every detail of their perfect celebration, rehearsed their smiles, measured their guest list to the last chair. And with a single phone call, I had unraveled the part they had most cherished, the crown jewel of their plans. Paradise denied. Not by accident, not by oversight, but by my hand. The thought didn't bring glee or cruelty. It brought balance. They had discarded me as though I were nothing. But a mother is never nothing. A mother is the root, the soil, the ground from which her child grows. They had tried to cut me out like a weed, but I had reminded them of something essential. You cannot sever the root and expect the tree to flourish. Another voicemail chimed, and this time Logan's voice cracked under the weight of pleading. Mom, I'm sorry. Please, don't do this. We can talk about the wedding. We can fix things. Angela's family. They're furious, but please, I need you to call me back. Please. The word please lingered in the air. For years, I had been the one begging silently for his respect, for acknowledgement, for a seat at the table. Now it was he who begged. The reversal was not lost on me. But I wasn't vindictive in that moment. I didn't gloat. I'd only felt the calm certainty that the scales had been leveled. I set the phone face down and looked back at the sunset. The sky was deepening now, shifting into indigo, the first stars winking faintly into view. The world outside my window moved on, unbothered by the turmoil unraveling in Logan's home. It struck me then how small their outrage was compared to the stillness of the universe, how fleeting their fury, how enduring my quiet satisfaction. They had gambled on erasing me, on constructing a story where I had no role. But what they hadn't understood was that exclusion carries consequences. You can push a mother aside, but you cannot erase the power of memory, of sacrifice, of the truth etched into blood. My act wasn't revenge for the sake of malice. It was justice carved from the stone of their arrogance. I drained the last sip of tea, the liquid gone cold, but no less comforting. My lips curved into a smile. Not a broad grin, not the triumph of victory shouted aloud, but the small, steady smile of a woman who had reclaimed what was hers. Respect. Justice had been served, not by courtrooms or family debates, but by the simple, undeniable reminder that I still mattered, that I still had power, that I could not be discarded so easily. As Logan and Angela scrambled to salvage what remained of their shattered honeymoon, I stayed by the window, the fading light wrapping around me like a cloak. The world outside was calm, and so was I. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not because they suffered, but because I had finally made them see me. And in that quiet, as the stars took their places in the sky, I knew with certainty, Martha was not drama. Martha was not irrelevant. Martha was mother. And no matter how hard they tried, no one could erase that truth.